This is a reading from Romans chapter 12. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is true worship. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, God's good, pleasing, and perfect will. For by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. Yesterday, I delivered 3 yearling lambs to a buyer in Paoli, Indiana, 3.5 hours away from us, over state roads in a part of Indiana where I had never been before. A part of Indiana which has both hills and trees, which is not a common sight in east central Indiana where we live, or anywhere along Interstate 70, which is what most drivers see of Indiana. Not having been to Paoli, I didn't know exactly where I was going, and I no longer have an actual road map of Indiana, but it wouldn't have helped me anyway because these people lived on a county road, which was either South County Road something west or else West County Road something south. And those are never marked on the map. So I depended on Google Maps, even though I'm ashamed to say it. And I put in the address and I headed off, went through Connersville, went this way, went that way, listening to what Google Maps told me. And every so often Google Maps would say, using the imperial we have discovered a shorter route that will cut your time by 12 minutes or something like this. And mostly I ignored it, but every so often I said, okay, sure, I will accept this new route. And I accepted it. And then suddenly I was on these really scenic roads that were no longer paved. And I thought to myself, why did I listen to Google Maps? And I thought, well, Google has a really authoritative voice. I just figured that it knew what it was talking about. I am a person also on the kind of absent-minded side of the thinking spectrum. So even though I love looking at maps, if I don't have a map, I'm particularly prone to driving on autopilot. And the time of my life which really kind of illustrated how prone I am to autopilot was when I lived in Newcastle, Pennsylvania, and I worked for a newspaper called the Newcastle News. And no matter where my girlfriend and I wanted to go in Newcastle, if I was driving, we always wound up at the Newcastle News. In my defense, we lived east of downtown. The news building was right in the middle of downtown, and most of where we wanted to go was west of downtown. So it's not like we went miles out of the way. We only went a couple of blocks. But if we were going to the grocery store, we went to the Newcastle News. If we were going to the movie theater, we went to the Newcastle News. If we were going to a hardware store, we went to the Newcastle News. We stopped at the news building no matter where we were going, because I spent so much of my life in that building. It was just automatic for me to drive to the news. And then we would go wherever we were going. And I'm pretty sure that if Suzanne had been with me yesterday, we would not have taken some of those back roads, and she would have just had she would not have entertained these authoritative sounding suggestions from Google. She would have turned down the suggestions and kept me to the main point, which was getting to Paoli to deliver the sheep. But she was not there because it seemed as though she probably had something better to do with 8 hours her day. And so on one of those unpaved gravel roads that I found myself on, winding up and down through really dense forest, which, as I say, is not really much like Indiana, except for this one part. I just kept thinking, how did I allow myself to be persuaded to take this road? I mean, it's not even like I was trying to value the relationship or anything. I don't have a relationship with Google where I'm trying to please Google by saying, see, I accept your suggestions. No, it's just, it sounded so like it really knew what it was talking about. And it was the authority of the voice and my autopilot response to the authority of the voice. Just like, well, of course I'm going to do that because Google knows. And I began to think about how easy it is to go through life that way, just accepting the loudest voices, the most authoritative voices, the voices that just surround you, all the background messages that you don't even know that you're receiving. But they're just there telling you how to live your life. Going with the flow. This is what's easiest, particularly when it comes down to what we consider to be normal or normative. And one of the ways that one of the places where this has really become apparent to me, this kind of background noise for normalism, and this is like kind of so Quaker of me, is noticing the choices we make about the clothing that we wear, or rather, I should say, the choices that we don't make about the clothing that we wear. So, as you know, I grow sheep for wool. Therefore, I want people to use wool. And then as a person who wants people to use wool, I've become more and more deliberate in trying to find wool clothing for myself. And sometime, if you want, I can give you all kinds of statistics about the decline of wool clothing in the 21st century and how much less wool clothing we use now than we used even 15 years ago. And how odd it now seems to people. Actually, now I go to a grocery store and someone will remark on some of my wool clothing because there are 20-year-olds who have never seen clothing made out of wool. Anyway, whatever. But a few weeks ago, we had a conversation in our lunchroom here at work. Now, not everyone who works at Friends United meeting is a Quaker, but a number of us are. And we had this conversation about where people buy their clothing and whether it's okay to buy from places like Shein, which promise you clothing for like $12 for a dress, and you wear it a few times, and then you actually throw it away. And is that okay? And I was totally and completely astonished that my coworkers, I had coworkers who thought that was just fine. That there was that because it's just there, right? And everybody does it. And so they never gave any thought to where their clothing actually came from, who was making it, under what circumstances, the material that it was made from, what that material means. Because that's one of my big things about people who don't wear wool. All the Quakers in the world, which is almost all the Quakers in North America, who have substituted polyester clothing made from oil over clothing made from wool, because it's just so easy to do. Everybody wears fleece. Fleece is made from oil. It's okay. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say I grow wool, and I can't understand why people wear clothing made from oil. But again, I'm a little too passionate about that. My coworkers just think that, clothing is clothing and it has nothing to do with God. And that's just an example. It's just, you go to the store and you take what's on the rack. That's the loudest voice. That's the Google Maps voice taking you deep into the wilderness to save 4 miles. And so I began to wonder, where is it that I can actually look and see what voices I am listening to? Which are the voices I want to listen to, and which are the voices that are just coming to me from the air around me? And I realized worship is that space. Worship in the church. Worship is the space where, as Paul says, and Richard Foster also, I can consider whether I am simply being conformed to the pattern of this world, or am I actually being renewed by the transforming of my mind? And it is so hard to step away from yourself and see what you're listening to. But every Sunday, I have that opportunity in worship. And not just in what happens in the silence or in the speaking, but also in the community around worship, and also in friendship. Because the people who worship with us are the people who actually do have some wherewithal to ask, why are you doing this? Why? What is your motivation? Why are you doing this? Because you made the choice? Because you're led by God? Or because it's just what everyone around you does? And I know that it is exhausting and impossible to make a conscious decision about every one of our behaviors. But again, through worship and the community around worship and through our friendships, we have assistance in navigating what choices we make that need to be intentional. At least my choosing as much wool as I am possible to choose has made one of my coworkers think more deeply about her clothing choices, so that it's no longer whatever is available on the rack, but what is available on the rack that is ethical. That's only one small, very small illustration about why we need each other in a community of faith, even though all of our spiritual paths vary, the way that we approach God, the places that God is leading us, what our spiritual gifts are, all different. And yet we need each other because we need people who will ask us, people who have earned our trust and whom we have given permission to ask us, why are you doing this? Why are you listening to those voices? And where ultimately do you want your road to lead you?